Thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you to the Nordic Council of Ministers for making this possible. I realize that last year, as was explained, you talk about quite a lot about creativity, and what I want to focus on very much in my presentation today is about what creative education actually looks like in the classroom, giving examples. But I very much agreed with the comments earlier that I hope my presentation is a stimulus to you having your own wonderful ideas and not something, ideas that you copy directly. So what is a creative education? I think first of all, I'd like to make the point that creative education is different from cultural education. And I'll start with a story about one of my children. This is my son, Ben. And I always think it's good to start with some family photographs to get us in the right mood. Ben's a big boy now, but this was many years ago. We were living in the United States, and his school had taken him to the local theatre to see a production because they thought some experience of the arts was very good. And on the day that he visited the theatre had hired a professional photographer to come in and take photographs of the children having a wonderful time in the theatre because they wanted to use the photographs in their annual report. And when they looked at all the photographs, they decided they would use this one because it's such a beautiful photograph of a young boy transported with the pleasure of the arts. And they had to ask my permission to use the photograph, so they contacted me. And I said, yes, of course, and I'd love a copy of the photograph. So they gave me a copy of the photograph, and I took it home, and I showed it to Ben. And I said, Ben, do you remember this? He said, oh, yes, it was the day that my school took us to the theatre. And I said, oh, well, the theatre want to use the photograph because it's such a beautiful photograph of a child really, as I said, transported with the joy of the arts. Can you remember what you were thinking when the photograph was taken? He said, oh, yes. I was thinking, thank God that's over. Now, there is a serious point to this story, which is there is no evidence that occasional encounters with the arts when you're young make any difference to young people at all. What you need to do is to immerse them in practices and ways of thinking, which they then are able to absorb into themselves. And it needs to become part of their everyday lives that they do this. And that's why what happens in the classroom is so fantastically important, because you as the teachers, I think, are the only people, together with the parents, who are able to create that total immersion. But does that mean the arts doesn't have a role to play? No, I think the arts do have an important role to play. And I'd like to start with an example from a primary school in England that we were working in. So we were working with 5, 6-year-olds, and an artist was working with the children. And he came in on the first day, and he said, we're going to work on self-portraiture. And I'd like to start with all of you drawing a picture of yourself. So all the children got busy, and they drew a picture, and after about 5 minutes, they'd all produce something. And this is a photograph of Riley, who's 6 years old, and as you can see, he's very proud of his teeth. Well, the artist stops and says, I want you now to really look at faces, and I want you to look closely at each other's, to feel them, to measure them, to look at them from different angles. And they spend about an hour and a half working in this way, and at the end of that, the artist says to the children again, now I'd like you to try again. And a couple of hours later, this is what Riley has produced. And you can see progress is being made. So the artist goes away, comes back the next week, and this time brings a little table mirror for each one of the children, puts the mirror on the table in front of them, and says, now you're really going to draw yourselves by looking in the mirror and drawing what you can see. And the children spend a couple of hours working on this, and they try things and they throw them away and they start again and they improve them. But after 2 hours, this is what Riley has drawn. Now, my background is more in the arts than education. I've run big cultural institutions and festivals and things. And artists have often said to me, are you an artist? And I go, well, I'm not an artist because I can't draw. And artists always say to me, actually, everyone can draw, most people can't see. And this is a brilliant example of that idea. The idea here being that you have to open up and use your senses, which is one of the key themes of these 2 days. If you can really see, then you will learn to draw. But more important than that, if you want to become an architect or a designer or a biologist or a chemist or a physicist, you need to learn to see what is really in front of you. And the arts are fundamental to the process of teaching you how your body works and developing your senses in that way. The visual arts helps you see. Music teaches you to hear. Dance teaches you how to use your body. Theatre teaches you about social interaction. These are all fundamental things that you really need to discover about yourself and learn how to do whatever you're going to do in the rest of your life. So the arts have a really fundamental role to play. But creativity isn't unique to the arts. And also, because it's arts, it doesn't mean it's good learning. The OECD, which is the organization which runs PISA, which you as teachers will have heard of undoubtedly, have just published a book on the impact of arts education. It's a collection of essays, and they published it in June. But in the introduction, they say, the idea that arts education fosters creativity, critical thinking, persistence, motivation, and self-concept is plausible. And there is some evidence that this is sometimes the case. But such outcomes depend on how the art is taught. The arts can be taught in ways that enhance these outcomes, or they can be taught poorly. So the key issue here, it's not about what you teach, it's about how you teach. And so in the case of the arts, is no different than from physics or chemistry or mathematics. It's how you teach that develops the creativity, critical thinking, persistence, and motivation, which we were talking about at the beginning, and are the set of skills which are fundamental for success in the 21st century. So what I want to talk about is how you teach and how this is developed. I think the UNESCO 4 definitions of 4 pillars of creativity, as they call them, is a very important starting point. They have learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, and learning to live together. Learning to know is the acquisition of knowledge. And of course you need to acquire knowledge. You can't do things without knowledge, and therefore it's important. But my view is that education is too focused on learning to know, on learning knowledge. It does a little bit of learning to do. You might learn to sing or play a musical instrument. It does almost nothing about learning to be and learning to live together. And those skills, those critical skills, creative skills, motivational skills, all exist in the learning to be and the learning to live together. And it's that area that you need to focus on. But again, our argument is it's not instead of what you normally teach, it's as well as. We have this idea, which I'll explain in a moment, about the low-functioning and high-functioning classroom. But essentially, what this chart is showing is that you get low-performing schools. And when you visit low-performing schools, you tend to find they're low-system schools, in the sense they're not very well organized, but they're also low-functioning schools, in the sense that the pupils and the teachers aren't really engaged. And education systems are very good at coming into low-performing schools and getting high system. They put in loads and loads of systems, much more regular testing, standard curriculum, all sorts of systems, discipline systems, behavior systems, and so forth. And there is no doubt that by putting in lots of systems, you can get better test scores, but you don't develop the other skills that we've been talking about. Most schools have cultural and artistic activities, which are enjoyable. and they're very high functioning. Both the teachers and the pupils really enjoy doing them. But in many schools, it's sort of treated as separate from real learning. In fact, in many English schools, they have what they call golden time, which is on Friday afternoons, which is if you've put up with very boring education all week, you can have some fun on a Friday afternoon and do some cultural activities. What we've always tried to do is to take the high-functioning aspects of cultural activities and put them right in the centre of the curriculum. There is no reason why science, maths, literacy, languages can't be taught in such a way that they become high-functioning. How do we go around doing this? We started by running a very big program in the United Kingdom, which was focused on unlocking creativity. At its peak, we were working in around 2,500 schools every year. It attracted a lot of international attention, and we've now developed programs unlocking creativity in Norway, in Sweden, in Lithuania, in Germany, and we're developing them in other places. And it works on the basis that schools apply to be in the program, and they apply with a problem they want to work on. They don't say, make us more creative. They go, we're worried about speaking and listening skills in grade 1, or we're worried about maths in grade 6, or we're worried about science in grade 11, whatever it might be. And we send a specially trained creative professional in to work with the teachers to create a project which addresses that issue. We've done lots of research on our program. Because the program was so big, we were able to do research other people weren't able to do. But we knew that the program was extremely successful in not only in engaging and making the children feel more confident, but in getting better behavior, in getting better motivation, and in getting better test results. So children who've been through our programs got better test results. And we asked researchers then to go in and study what was happening in the classroom and to ask why are we getting such a positive response from children. And they said, because the projects that you create are spaces where normal school operating rules don't apply. And we said, well, what are the characteristics of this space? And they said, it looks like this. On the right, you have what we call the high-functioning classroom, and on the left, you have a low-functioning classroom, and I would argue that the low-functioning classroom is more like traditional education. So the things that are different, or in contrast, the role of the teacher. In a traditional education, the role of the teacher is to guide the pupil to the answer, i.e. to acquire the knowledge. And teachers usually have lesson plans, and the lesson plan starts with some exercise to point the children in the right direction, and eventually you get to the point where you tell them the answer, and then you do a bit of a test to make sure they've learnt the answer, and then your 45 minutes is up. What the researchers said is there's a problem with this, one of which is the lower ability pupils never learn to do it themselves. The higher ability pupils work out the system. And it results in what the researchers called minute 37 syndrome, which is the clever kids work out you're going to tell them the answer at about minute 37, and for the first 36 minutes they stare out the window. Why bother? Because you're going to tell them the answer. And then they wake up, listen to the answer, write it down, pass the test, and you've made progress. One of the researchers has published a really interesting article following a 14-year-old girl around school for 3 days. Just followed her, watched her, what she was doing and what she was learning. And the researcher's estimate was that over a 3-day period, she did 11 minutes of learning. The rest of the time she was chatting to her friends, she was staring out the window, she was doing other things and so forth. In England, we spend £1 billion a week, more than €1 billion a week on education. For 11 minutes of learning, it's not a great return. But there are other aspects which are really key. The nature of the activities you do in class feel very authentic and real to the children. Often the work you do feels authentic. The organisation of time is very flexible. You take as much time as you need. Often when I talk about timetabling, people go, it's completely impossible. The timetable's set at the beginning of the year. I've got 45 minutes to do this. That's what I've got to do. I was visiting a school in England the other day, secondary school, 11 to 18-year-olds. They are very digitized, but they have a system that they do the timetable for the whole school every Friday afternoon according to the performance of the children in the previous week. So that if that group of children actually needs an extra 2 hours of maths to make sure they don't fall behind, they get an extra 2 hours of maths. It's possible to do that if you really want to do it. And I've seen schools which do that. The organisation of space is very flexible. It's also very social with a lot of group working. The visibility of the processes and the outcomes are very high. This was an interesting point which I hadn't thought about before. What the researchers said is that in our projects, the ones that we do in schools, they are very highly visible. So you might be in grade 6 and doing maths, but what you're actually doing is using maths to build a big structure in the middle of the school grounds. And everybody can see you doing it, and everybody is waiting to see how successful you are at doing that. So it's very visible. And what the researchers said is that high visibility is high risk. So if you know that not only your teacher, but the rest of the class, in fact the rest of the school, and maybe your parents are going to see what you've done, you take it much more seriously, because that's much more risky to you. But what the researchers said is young people like risk. It's really interesting to them. It makes life exciting. And on the whole, we've made school too safe, too protected for children, and actually it's worth making it a lot more dangerous. Not physically dangerous, but emotional and social risk is far scarier than physical risk. The location of the activities tend to be very mobile. You tend to be moving all over the place. The self as a learning resource is that what you bring, your stories, your background, your observations as the pupil are absolutely fundamental to the learning process. And emotion is acknowledged as being part of what goes on in class. We talk about emotion quite a lot. And in fact, I was in a school the other day, and I was talking to some 12, 13-year-olds. And I said, is it important that teachers do creative things in school? And these children said, oh, it's really important. And I said, why is it important? And this boy said, I'll tell you why it's important. When my teacher is teaching her normal stuff, she's got her grumpy face on. And when she's got her grumpy face on, I don't like asking questions because I think she'll be cross. But when she's doing her creative things, she's got her happy face on, and then I don't mind asking questions if I don't understand, and we have a good conversation about it. Now, it was with a group of teachers and the head teacher, and you could hear all the adults go, because he was exposing one of the truths that we try and keep hidden. What he was saying is, I change my learning behavior according to the mood my teacher is in. Now, most teachers would like to pretend that's not the case. I'm always in the same mood. You know, why would they do that? And you're not always in the same mood, and it's not true. We often say to teachers, if you're in a really bad mood, it's not your fault, you got out the wrong side of bed in the morning, go into the classroom and say, I'm in a really bad mood. And teachers say, I can't do that. I'll scare the children. And you go, no, what scares the children is they know you're in a bad mood, but you won't tell them why, and you won't talk about it. That's what's scary. And therefore, bringing emotion into the classroom and making it part of what you do is really important to that process. Now, what we found is that if you teach in that way, if you develop the high-functioning classroom, you observe the impact on pupils. And the impact on pupils, when it's done, is always improved confidence, greater motivation, better collaboration, greater resilience, by which I mean coming back from failure, better discipline, and improved attainment. And teachers go, well, I want that all the time. I don't want that just when I'm doing one of your projects. And they begin to take that learning back into their daily practice. And I've seen this again and again. I've seen this in the UK and in England. And just the other day, I was in Lithuania in a fairly small secondary school up on the Latvian border. It's in an area very like this. It looked almost exactly the same, very rural area. And there was a group of teachers who I spent 2 hours with, in which they just sat and talked about all the new ideas they were beginning to introduce into their teaching as a result of having gone through exactly this process. And they were like 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds. They'd been in teaching for many years and so forth, and suddenly teaching had become interesting and exciting. And one of the teachers said to me, actually, I was just counting the years until I retired, and suddenly I hope that I'll never retire because I'm just enjoying myself so much. The theory, you don't believe me, do you? the theory which the researchers said lies underneath this is this. The high-functioning classroom, if you teach like that, the children are physically engaged, socially engaged, emotionally engaged, and physically engaged. And when you're physically, socially, emotionally, and intellectually engaged, you are at your most alive. That's when you're a human being. That's what being a human being is all about. And you feel really good, and you feel confident, and when you're fully engaged, all of you, then of course you get high performance. So this is why this approach has been generating such positive results. So what does it all look like in practice? I know this is what you want to know. That was all very theoretical, and I'm going to give you a few quick examples. What does the high-functioning classroom look like? Well, here's a high-functioning classroom for you. This one is actually in Kaunas in Lithuania. So the issue that the school brought to us was that the children were not making progress in literacy. That's what they wanted to work on. They were supposed to be learning their letters. They were not learning their letters. And we said, okay, we think the problem is they're not listening, and if we teach them to hear properly, they will learn their letters properly. And so what they're doing in this photograph, it's on the first day of the project, is they're listening to their school. That's all they're doing. And then they have a big discussion about what they can hear and so forth. Then they take them out around town. They took them to the railway station. And what they had to do was listen to the sounds and using letters, make up words which reproduce the sounds that they could hear. The sounds of trains, the sounds of brakes, the sounds of announcements, and so forth. So they're using letters creatively to reproduce sounds. Here they are in a subway doing it. Here they are in an indoor market doing it. And you can see this intense level of concentration in what they're doing. And yet what they're doing, I remember it from school, is one of the most boring things, which is writing their letters. G, 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 g. But it's suddenly become really interesting to do. This is them listening to a sculpture, to see what sculpture sounds like. They were taken to the local university in town, where they went to a Turkish lecture. None of them were Turkish, none of them had ever spoken Turkish, but they had to, just by listening, sit there and write Turkish. Then they came back into class, and what they're doing here is, with their notes, looking at the ideas they had and beginning to share the ideas between them and working out which ones are the best ones. And each table had to come up with a piece of paper with their best ideas on it. And this is one of the sheets of paper. It's a bit hard to read, but right at the top is the word stotis, which is the Lithuanian word for station. And the first word underneath that is čektikas, which is the sound that that group of children have, the word that that group of children have come up with to capture the sound of a train coming into the station. Čektikas, 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 čektikas. And all those words are words like that. Then they were given a final exercise in which what they had to do is select a painting, and then they had to create a soundtrack for the painting, which captured the feeling in the painting, only making sounds that they could make with their mouths. And this is one of them. So they thought this was a painting of heaven, and they're trying to get the sound of the waves and the wind blowing, and the whistling is the birds flying over the top. And what you can see is that project absolutely was a high-functioning project. They worked in groups, it was very social, it felt very real to them. They were given a challenge, they weren't right answers, but they were learning how to use letters very effectively. It was very mobile. They were central to the learning because it was their hearing that they were using. It involved feelings and other things. So it's not that difficult to do. It doesn't involve a new curriculum or new books or technology. It's about good ideas, about how to explore these. And the result here, and I visited the school a few weeks ago, is not only have their literacy scores got much, much better very, very quickly, and they're really into writing and using letters and doing all that kind of thing, is that the buzz in the school that has been generated about teaching this way is I sat in a classroom one afternoon, again, with the teacher who'd done this project and another group of teachers going, and how did you do that, and how did you do that? And all of that was going on. This is a maths project. It's a video. Here we were asked to work with 13, 14-year-olds who were not doing well in maths. In fact, they were a low ability group and so forth. And this short video shows what they did.
My name's Fiona Johnson, and I'm an animator, and I've been working with pupils at Harrowfold to engage them more in maths. So my part was to take over after the drama artist had actually worked with the children to look at different scenarios where math could actually take place. Then my job to take over that was to animate what they'd learnt. So we sort of created some dramas, and the animation part came in was to have some animation mixed in with the live action. So we took their graphs and their objects that they were animating. So for an example, one group were the Russian mafia, and their math problem was to drink as many shots of vodka as they...
Oh. Could I just say that it wasn't real vodka? Hang on a minute.
Having experienced the processes of creating an animation, we decided to produce one in-house in order to illustrate more of the key concepts of the maths curriculum. As an arts college, we're fortunate to have the facilities to be able to do this, as can be seen from the following example.
Welcome to Maths News. Today's story is very exciting. There is a crisis in the farming industry. Due to the lack of space in the countryside, farmers are having to relocate hen coops. We now hand over to our exceptional reporter, Alex, who is on the roof.
Thank you, Jasmine. We have been speaking to local eggs to find out exactly what has been happening.
It's cracking, mate.
I'm shell-shocked.
It's awful, just awful. Terrible, terrible, terrible.
We spoke to one of the relocated hens.
This is awful. 30 of my eggs have been scrambled on the pavement. I'd like to know what speed they fell at when they left that roof.
I spoke to an expert who had been working on the equation.
I used the equation distance divided by times equals speed. These were my findings.
The results show that the speed of the first egg drop was 9.8 meters per second. The second egg drop was 9.7 meters per second, and the third egg drop was 9.9 meters per second, giving an average of 9.8. In conclusion, the results show that the eggs should stay in the country. This is Alex reporting for Maths.
So, I don't need to tell you that they were having a lot of fun making all those animations. They were clearly enjoying themselves. And also you can see it was a high-functioning environment with all the characteristics I've already talked about. The key part of that story was at the end of the year of working in that way, this group of people, who were the low ability ones, when they sat the exams, got the best scores of all the groups in the school. So they outperformed the high ability kids in their maths scores. And this was a huge shock to the school in terms of the system, because it was saying, okay, we worried about low ability kids, how we get the levels up, but we've actually made the low ability kids better than the good ability kids. What are we doing to the good ability kids in not developing them appropriately? But is creative education just about better test results and improved behaviour? Our experience was that unless you delivered better test results and improved behaviour, it was hard to get schools involved in this programme. But it wasn't the core point. The core point was to develop a wider set of skills which is really going to set them up for the rest of their lives. And I just want to give you some quick examples before I finish on this. Actually, I'll skip this one. Learning to take responsibility. One of the key issues is that if you want young people to learn like that, they have to take responsibility for their own learning. You're going to create a space in which they can take responsibility, but they have to take it. And what we found is that you have to give them real responsibility and room to practice this if they're going to do it. So in this project, we were working with a primary school in a very deprived area in the middle of England, where the kids were not badly behaved, but they were just very disengaged from their learning and would not take responsibility. And so we said, if you want them to take responsibility, you have to give them responsibility. So we looked around for the project, and the school had a budget to build a new classroom. The school was getting bigger, and it needed a new building. And so we gave the children the responsibility for creating this new classroom. In England, primary schools go from the age of 5 to the age of 11. So the children all got together and said, what kind of classroom would we like? And in my experience, children think very conceptually, and therefore they thought classroom equals learning environment. What's a good learning environment? And some of them wanted to build a castle to learn in, and some of them wanted to build a beach that they could learn at. But the idea that they went with is that they would buy a full-size passenger aeroplane, and they would have it delivered to the school, and they would turn that into a classroom. So year 6, who was the oldest year, had responsibility for getting planning permission, because if you park a full-size aeroplane in your yard in England, you need permission from the municipality. And they had to download all the forms and fill them in and go to the city hall and talk to the planning officers and so forth to get the planning permission to do this. Year 5 had to find an aeroplane. So they went on to eBay, and they found this aeroplane, which was going for sale, and it was coming out of service, and it was going for scrap. It was just the metal. So they bought it cheaply, and they had it delivered to the school. And here is the aeroplane when it had arrived at the school, with the very surprised school director standing in front of it. Year 4 had to do the interior design, because obviously the aeroplane just arrived with rows of seats in it, and the really important thing was to convert that into a classroom. So they went online and they found a designer who specializes on aeroplane interiors. And in fact, he'd done the inside of the private jet of one of our most famous footballers, David Beckham. So they emailed him and said, we've just bought an aeroplane and it needs converting into a classroom. And he did all the work for free on it because he liked the project so much. It was such fun to do. And now those are the children in their classroom, which they've created, having a good time. Now, there's some key things here. The whole project was a literacy project. The reason year 6 were made to go and do the planning permission is they had to read all the forms, read the regulations, write the forms out and so forth. So it was getting them writing. The year 4s who was looking for the designer, they had to email the designer and draft letters and do all that kind of thing. So there was a lot of writing involved all the way through this. But much more important than that, what these young people learned was that the important thing in creativity is not having the idea, but making that idea happen. And having the discipline, the resilience, the focus, the collaborative skills, as well as the imagination to make it happen. And for young people, I think this is really important. They have to believe they can turn their ideas into things that happen. And so often in school, we do not empower them to learn that. They think they did well in school because teachers made them good in school, and that's one of the reasons. But they didn't learn that they did it for themselves, and that's really key in terms of the skills. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit about feeling. I've talked about them before. This is another project. We did this in Austria. It's a literacy project, and the kids are doing an exercise in which we come in with big posters and magazines, and they cut out faces, and the faces they then have to wear, and then they tell a story in the character that they've just created. In this class, there was a boy whose parents were getting divorced, and it was one of these very difficult divorces in which the father had already left, The mother could no longer afford the apartment they had together, so she'd moved into another apartment, which meant the boy had to move school. So from the boy's point of view, he'd lost his father, he'd lost his family, he'd lost all his friends. Life was bad. And when it was his turn, this is the boy, he cut out this face and put it on, and when it was his turn to tell the story, he told this story. He said, I'm a man, and last night I went to the bar, and I drank too much, and I was drunk. And I shouldn't have done it, but I decided to drive home, and by accident, I ran over my parents and killed them. And nobody saw, so I put the bodies in the back of the car, and I took them home and I buried them. And now everybody's very worried because my parents are missing, and they're all being very nice to me because my parents are missing, but they don't realize that I murdered them. Now, young children this age, when their parents get divorced, feel very guilty because their concept of family is them. There were these two adults who were not a family. They came together and had me, and suddenly we're a family, so I'm the family. And therefore, if they don't want to be a family anymore, it's because I've done something wrong. So they feel really guilty. What this way of working does is create safe spaces in which you can express the way you're feeling. It's very difficult to get up and go, I feel really bad and guilty about my parents getting divorced. But by doing it in this way, you can do it as a metaphor. You can tell the story, but it's pretend. But actually you know, and everyone listening knows, what you're talking about. And it's that ambiguous space which this way of working creates, allows the emotion to come out. And what's really key in this is, you know, when you hear a story like that, with all that emotion going on, that boy wasn't going to do any learning. There was no learning going on because he was struggling with that all the whole time. And I think, although this is an extreme example, that is going on in class all the time. There are all these emotions and there's nowhere to put them. And I think particularly in the UK, particularly with boys, when they move into the teenage years, it becomes a problem. And it comes out in hugely inappropriate behaviour. I've got just one more example. This is a project we did in Malmö in Sweden. There's a short introduction, and I'll then explain what's important.
Förra veckan så pratade vi om känslor i klassen. Och då kom vi in på en känsla som är rädsla. Och då fick ni rita en bild.
Och den här bilden, vad säger den då? Och det står någonting här på baksidan. Viskningar från underjorden. En kniv, blodig kniv. Man blir rädd.
Vad är de här flickorna rädda för, Hanna? Det är du som har ritat den bilden.
Ja,
Vad är det du har ritat?
det är några flickor som är ute och hör massa röster. Jag blandar ihop massa viskningar.
Klockan är jättemycket så vi får gå ut på rast nu allihop.
So there's two things really important about that. The first thing is, this is a film that the children wrote and performed over a whole year. And the important thing about that class is that wasn't a documentary, that was them acting. behaving really badly in class. And I met the kids a few months ago and said to them, how did you know how to behave so badly? And they went, oh, we know how to do bad. But the thing is that they have this instinctive understanding of pedagogy in which they are able to reproduce that highly disruptive behavior which is most undermining to teachers and which you could see there. But the other important thing was this. They wanted to make a film about fear. That's what they wanted to focus on. And during the time they were writing the script, during the autumn term, there was a gunman loose in Malmo who was shooting immigrants dead in the street at random. Appear, shoot an immigrant dead, disappear. All the kids in this school were immigrant kids. So the thing they were most scared of was being shot. That was what they were scared about. So it would have been perfectly natural for them to make a film which was about this awful gunman who was a baddie, and them the innocent victims, and in the end the gunman gets caught, which he was in real life, and that solved it. But it's not what they do. There's no reference to the gunman in the film, except the title of the film is Targets. And the word target in the film is used to describe someone who's bullied. And what the children have done is this imaginative leap that went, actually, the gunman is a bully. And bullying behavior starts in us. And if we want to stop gunmen, we have to start with ourselves. I think this is an enormously important imaginative leap because this is young children developing a moral and ethical framework which will govern their behavior. This is how they explore them. And we spend so much time saying that young people need to grow up to be moral and ethical and so forth, but actually we don't give them space to learn how to be that. Giving them the 10 Commandments and making them learn them off by heart, that doesn't make moral and ethical people. You've got to really look hard at the issues which lie underneath that. In England, we have a book which almost all children study at the age of 16 called Lord of the Flies. You might know it, it was turned into a movie. The plot of Lord of the Flies is an aeroplane full of children and teachers crashes on an island, all the teachers are killed and the children are left on their own. And the plot is the children end up doing what you would expect children left on their own to do, which is to become murderers and cannibals. Well, that is very much the British paradigm of education. Education there is to save children from themselves. And I fundamentally don't believe that. I think children have inside themselves the capacity to be extraordinary citizens, extraordinary and wonderful people. But our job is to release that and let that happen. But to do that, you have to create space. You have to create space where they can explore those issues and they can do it in that way. And that's what a high-functioning classroom is all about. That space to truly become the person that you can be and to truly learn how to live together. Thank you very much indeed.